Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you my November book haul. I talked about all the reasons why November sucked in my November wrap-up. It wasn't a great month for reading, but guys, it was a great month for hauling. So I actually don't have a lot of these books on me anymore. When lockdown ended, went back home like for 15 minutes to like get prescriptions and drop off a bunch of books to make the trip back after Christmas easier. So I'm just gonna be posting up the cover on the screen here. I'm gonna run through these really quickly because there are a lot of books, but as per usual, what I will go ahead and do is put the links to all of these books in the description down below. If you want to hear a little bit more about them, you can go ahead and find them there, but this is gonna be hopefully a short and sweet video. Okay, I've got my list of books that I received in the month of November, so as per usual, I'm going to break these up into physical books, then NetGalley books, and then books that I purchased for myself or acquired through some other means. Again, this will be pretty quick, but yeah, this is a really good list, you guys. There's a lot of really good stuff here. So first off, I'm going to talk about the physical review copies that I received from publishers. Again, although I have these physically, the covers will be up on the screen. So the first one is one that I talked about in my November wrap-up. Loved it, 5-star read. This is Call of the Bone Ships. This is the second book in the Tide Child trilogy. So this came out from Orbit Books at the end of December. R.J. Barker is one of my absolute favorite fantasy authors. I loved The Bone Ships. It was tied for #1 as my favorite book of 2019, and this was a fabulous read. I would highly recommend these books. They're so good. And there's one more coming next year, and I think it's gonna ruin my life, and I'm really excited. So the next book that I have is also from Orbit. This is the Ichisar Falcon by K.S. Veloso. I guarantee I'm saying the title wrong. I have to watch someone else's video to make sure I'm saying it right. I haven't done that yet though. So this came out in late November. The first book, which is The Wolf of Oren-Yaro, came out earlier this year, which I have a review for. I loved it. I loved that first book so much. So I'll go ahead and post that up on the screen for you if you want to check that out. But I am so excited to read this because that first book ends on such a cliffhanger, and it's going to be so good. And it's also much chunkier than the first book, so we're getting a lot more story, and I'm really excited. I have also heard, guys, apparently this book has a like 1 to 2 page synopsis of what happened in the first book at the beginning. Like, why don't more publishers do that? Why don't more authors do that? I would love that so much because I have the memory of a goldfish. I can't remember what I did this morning, let alone a book that I read in March, especially this year. So I am 100% here for authors and publishers doing this more often. But what this is about, basically we have a character who is the queen of her people, the Oren-Yaro, and she is estranged from her husband for I think 5 years to a decade. I can't remember. I think it's 5 years. She receives a letter from him saying that he wants to make amends. So she goes and she travels to him and ends up falling into a trap, into an assassination attempt, and she is left alone in a foreign country fighting for her life. It is so good. We've got a flawed female main character who is not the nicest person in the world, but is fabulous, and I love her so much. We have amazing secondary characters, a great plot. You definitely need to read this because it's so good. Ooh, my butt's asleep. We're really gonna run through this quickly because my butt's asleep. So the next book that I have is Dead Man in a Ditch by Luke Arnold. The first book, which is The Last Smile in Sunder City, is basically, I tell people if you couldn't stand Harry Dresden, you need to read this instead because it is urban fantasy. It's fabulous. It's got all these amazing sort of fantasy creatures and this sort of PI, private detective kind of guy, but he's not a misogynistic dickhead like, what's his face? Harry Dresden. I totally slipped my mind for a second. That's how much I hate him. I would highly recommend this if you were looking for urban fantasy. Basically, it takes place in a city, in a world where sort of magical creatures reigned supreme until magic left the world. And so now all these creatures are kind of slowly dying off now that their magic is gone, and humans for the first time are kind of top dog because they didn't need magic to survive and prolong their lives. It's really good. I really enjoyed this. I wasn't necessarily expecting a ton because I have read a couple of books from actors who have decided to write a novel that haven't really gone well, but this was fabulous. I really, really enjoyed the first book. I cannot wait to read the second one. Next up is another book that I read in the month of November, so you can check out more in my wrap-up, but this is Letters from the Dead by Sam Hercombe. This came out from Orbit, I believe, in November, and it's a really, really fun, quite dark, gothic detective story with legit ghosts and stuff. So it takes place in Edwardian London, and we follow this character who's literally haunted by his last case. He's gone full on into alcoholism. He is just sort of like, his life is circling the drain until he is pulled out by the police, and they need help finding this criminal called the Wraith, who is kidnapping and murdering across London. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really good fun. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Again, you can check out more in that wrap-up video. Then we have one of my most anticipated books of the year. This is on my December TBR. It's actually one of the few books from my TBR that I haven't managed to get to yet because I am rocking my December TBR, by the way. This is Hollow Empire by Sam Hawke. This is the sequel to City of Lies, which was one of my favorite books from last year. Such fabulous, fabulous fantasy writing. I cannot recommend her books more highly. They are basically fantasy, murder, mystery, and they are so, so, so good. I talk about this quite a lot in my December TBR, so go ahead and check that out. I'll link it up above and down below if you would like to learn a little bit more. Next is a book that I'm so excited for. This comes out from Hotkey Books in April, so we've got a little bit of time, but I'm definitely going to be reading this soon. This is Witches Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart. This is a new Jamaican-inspired YA fantasy book about 2 witches who are enemies who have to join forces to sort of destroy a common enemy. Apparently this is very much like a cat and mouse game. The blurb compares it to like Killing Eve for fans of Killing Eve, and although I've only seen a couple of episodes of Killing Eve because I'm terrible at TV, that makes me very excited. This sounds so good. There have been a couple of booktubers talking about this who have already read it, and like, I am beyond thrilled to get my hands on this. So I am hopefully going to be reading this very, very soon, and I will let you guys know what I think, but like, this is one of my most anticipated books of next year. I'm so excited. And the last physical copy that I received from publishers is another one that I'm really excited for next year. This is Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. This is a sort of urban fantasy book that is set in Edinburgh, which like I'm so excited for. The best city in the world, a place I lived for a while and know very well, and I'm so excited for this. I think that this is going to be fabulous. I can't wait. In this book we follow a character named Ropa, and she has dropped out of university to become a ghost talker, someone who can communicate with the dead. So in order to earn her living, she basically carries messages from the dead to their families, and she ends up sort of hearing whispers from the dead about someone who was going around Edinburgh and sort of bewitching children and leaving them sort of empty husks of human beings. And she ends up sort of investigating and discovering this occult library and some unlikely allies. This sounds so good. I'm really excited for this one. I love any book that is set in Edinburgh because I have a close connection to the city, but this sounds particularly good. I'm not usually really into urban fantasy, but this sounds like it's going to be right up my alley, and I am thrilled to read it. So now we are moving on to NetGalley books. I have 3 audiobooks, and the rest are just regular ebooks like you would expect from NetGalley. So the first one is, I believe, out in the States right now, but it doesn't come out until next year, I think February of 2021 here in the UK. This is Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. I'm so pumped for this. This is gonna be so good. So this looks like a book that's quite complicated in terms of what it's actually about, but I believe it's a gothic sort of thriller that's also quite fun, and I believe it spans quite a large period of time from, I believe, the 19th century to the present day in this boarding school. It's gothic, it's mad, it's sapphic. This sounds so good, and everyone that I know who has read this so far has absolutely loved it. So I have the audiobook for this one. I'm really looking forward to getting down to some very serious knitting and listening to this one. So the next book that I have is one that I don't know a huge amount about, but is one that I am sort of intentionally not learning a huge amount about, because I think it's going to be one of those books that's best to go into knowing as little as possible. I also think it's one of those ones where if you look at the blurb, you're just like, I don't really know what this is about. So this is The Betrayals by Bridget Collins. You may recognize that name because she was the author of The Binding, which was a huge book here in the UK last year when it came out. I have not read The Binding yet. It is actually sitting just here in that TBR that I brought with me in November. And I'm borrowing it from my sister, so I'm hopefully going to read that at some point, but these two novels very much stand alone, so I don't have to worry too much about like reading The Binding before The Betrayal. So apparently this is a beautiful dystopian romance about coming of age as an artist and the love affair that artistic collaboration can be. What that means, I don't really know. But basically this book follows a character named Leo, I believe, and he was a student at this ancient academy where they teach you sort of art and music and literature, and also some meddling with the arcane, I believe. So he once excelled in this school, and a sort of violent tragedy sort of changed his life, and he ended up leaving, getting into politics. However, although he was a rising star in politics, he sort of makes a decision of conscience that costs him his political career, so he ends up going back to the school. It sounds interesting. I have a friend who has read this, and I'm really looking forward to reading this myself. I have the audiobook and talking to her about it, because I have a sneaking suspicion that this is going to be either a book I love or I hate, and probably no middle ground, but we'll go ahead and see. I'm very curious to hear if you have read this, what you thought. The last audiobook that I have from NetGalley is 13 Stories by Jonathan Sim. Apparently he is the creator of the Magnus Archive podcast, which I feel I've heard been thrown around before. If you're a fan, let me know. But this is a horror book. It is a modern twist on a haunted house story. So basically in this book there is a dinner party being held in the penthouse of a multi-million-pound development. All the guests are strangers, including the host, who is the billionaire owner of this building. So no one knows why they were selected to receive his invitation. So whether privileged or deprived, they share one thing in common. They've all experienced a shocking disturbance within the building's walls. So at the end of the night, their host is dead, and none of the guests will say what happened. His death remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries until now. But are you ready for their stories? This sounds so fun. I'm really excited for this. This is part of my foray into horror that I've been trying to do this year, and I'm really looking forward to this. I've heard a couple people have read this and they have all really enjoyed it, so this is, I think, going to be a really good one. I love horror in sort of the wintry months, so I think that this is going to be a great one to read soon. My leg is asleep again. I really need to not record on the floor anymore. So apologies for my slightly awkward positioning. But the next book that I have is The Kingdoms by Natasha Pulley. So she's the author of The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, which is a book I've had on my TBR for a while and I've heard is a lovely book, but I haven't gotten to yet. So this is her new book that comes out in May of 2021, and it looks like it's going to be a sort of alternate history fantasy type book. So we have a character named Joe Tournier, and a postcard has been held at the sorting office for 91 years, waiting to be delivered to him. So on the front is a lighthouse in the Outer Hebrides. So Joe has never left England, and he has never even left London. He is a British slave, one of thousands throughout the French Empire. He has a job, a wife, a baby daughter, but he also has flashes of a life in which English is spoken in England and the French have not taken over. So he is going to head to this lighthouse, which was only built 6 years ago, but somehow this postcard was written over 100 years ago, and figure out this mystery. It sounds like a really interesting book. It's not something that is usually quite my style, but I've heard really good things about her writing, so I'm very curious about this. The next book that I have is Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. This comes out in January, and it's one I'm really intrigued by. I have seen this book popping up everywhere. I think it's going to be a big debut for Orbit, and I'm very curious to see what it is about. So apparently this is the beginning of a new trilogy, the Rook and Rose trilogy, and it features a con artist, a vigilante, and a crime lord who must unite to save their city. So we follow a character named Renata, and she is the con artist, and she basically comes to this city with one goal, which is to trick her way into a noble household and secure the fortune for herself and for her sister. But as she's drawn into this world, she realizes that her masquerade is one of many surrounding her. And as corrupt magic begins to weave its way through the city, the poisonous feuds of its aristocrats and the shadowy danger of its impoverished underbelly becomes tangled with Ren at their heart. This sounds really good. I'm very excited for this. I think Judith from Dead Good Book Reviews has just read this, so I have to check out her thoughts on it. But it sounds really fun. I think it is a deceptively chunky book. Yeah, it's 672 pages, and I, for some reason, thought it would be a lot shorter than that, but I am super excited to read this. I think it's going to be really interesting. I have been kind of craving that sort of underdog, sort of criminals doing right kind of book, and I think that this is very much going to scratch that itch. Next up, I have a book that I've actually now read in the month of December, so you'll see it in my wrap-up, but this has already come out in the US. It is due to come out in the UK in January from Titan Books. This is The Seep by Channa Porter. I put this on my December TBR, I believe, and I have now read it. It's basically about the softest alien invasion ever. There's this sort of alien presence called the Seep, which ends up invading Earth, and sort of its goal is to make mankind happy and content. However, this book brings in a lot of questions of consent, what makes us human, and sort of, do we have the right to make bad choices for ourselves? It's really interesting. It is weird. If you don't like weird sci-fi, I would not recommend this. But if you're looking for a novella that is really interesting, a little off the beaten path, I would recommend this. The next book that I have is interesting. So this is a graphic novel. I think these are a series of comics. I feel like I've seen them around before, but this is The Sad Ghost Club by Lizzie Meddings. So basically, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's sad ghosts. It's ghosts with anxiety and depression. And I feel like it's a very relatable thing to a lot of people. So basically, we have two sad ghosts who spy each other from across a party, and they end up creating the Sad Ghost Club, which is a secret society for the anxious and alone, a club for people who think they don't belong. Apparently this is great for fans of Heartstopper, which I have not read, but I think I would love. I need to borrow them from Judith, actually. I think she has them. And it just sounds cute. It sounds sweet, so I went ahead and requested it. Again, this is another one that is a little bit different from my usual thing, but it could be cute. I wanted to branch out a little. The next book on my list is a gothic thriller that comes out in March of 2021, and I'm really looking forward to this. It sounds fabulous. So this is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. You may remember that name from the book Little Eve, which is sat right here. It's part of my November TBR that I brought with me to my parents' place. I've been wanting to read her for a very long time, and apparently this book is amazing. It got blurbed by Stephen King. He said that it was great. I've heard so many great things about this, and it's getting so much buzz, and I totally got sucked in. I really want to read this, so I was so thrilled to be approved for a copy. So basically, this is the story of a murderer, a stolen child, revenge. This is the story of Ted, who lives with his daughter Lauren and his cat Olivia in an ordinary house at the end of an ordinary street. All these things are true, yet some of them are lies. You think you know what's inside the last house on Needless Street. You think you've read this story before. In the dark forest at the end of Needless Street, something lies buried, but it's not what you think. That tells me nothing, and I'm so excited. This is going to be an amazing book. I think this is going to be another one that is great to go into knowing as little as possible, as is usual with thrillers, and I am beyond excited for this. Another one that's a little bit different from my usual cup of tea, but I do really enjoy a good thriller, but I have a really hard time finding them, so I think that this has a lot of promise, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be so good. And the last NetGalley book that I have is Bearhead by Adrian Tchaikovsky, who you probably know is one of my favorite science fiction authors. This is the sequel to The Dogs of War, which I have not read yet, but Scottish Husband has been like nudging me to read for ages because he really enjoyed it, and I figured with a new one coming out, my time has come. I'm definitely going to pick it up soon. But this new book comes out in January, and I'm really looking forward to this because it sounds very intriguing. So in this book, we have a character named Jimmy Martin, who is smuggling illegal data in his headspace. But for the first time, the illegal data is talking to him. The data claims to be a distinguished academic, an author, and civil rights activist, and it also claims to be a bear named Honey. When I told Scottish Husband that part, his eyes went really wide and he's like, I love Honey! So I think Honey is a character in Dogs of War. So if you've read that, you may be very excited hearing that. So basically, Jimmy has nothing against bioforms. He is one himself, albeit one engineered out of human stock, and he works with them every day in Hell City on Mars, building the future and staking mankind's claim to the new world of Mars. But one problem is that humanity isn't the only entity with designs on the red planet. So out in the airless desert, there is another presence, a novel intelligence, elusive, unknowable, and possibly lethal. So Honey is here to make contact with it, whether Jimmy wants to or not. This sounds so fun. This sounds like exactly the kind of sci-fi that I really love. I have not read a lot of sci-fi this year. I actually went ahead and counted. I read like 11 sci-fi books, and the majority of them were like in the past couple of months. So I am totally here for sci-fi in this coming year. I think it's going to be such a good year for science fiction reading, and I'm totally here for it. So now we're moving on to pre-orders and books that I sort of picked up and ordered for myself. So the first one being The Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, the 4th book in the Stormlight Archive. Y'all know what the Stormlight Archive is. It's his big, like, epic, projected 10-book series. I am currently listening to Words of Radiance, which is the 2nd book, so I've got a while until I get to The Rhythm of War, but I'm super pumped. You guys know all about this already. I feel like I don't really need to go into it anymore. Then I have my Goldsboro SFF Fellowship book of the month for November, which is The Stone Knife by Anna Stevens. I did an interview with Anna Stevens and she is a goddamn delight. It was so fun. You can go ahead and watch that. I'll link it up above, down below, all of the places, and you can learn a little bit more about this book. When I had picked up this on NetGalley the other month, I was plagued with migraines, so I didn't end up getting to read the full book on my iPad, so I'm really looking forward to going back to the beginning and continuing on and finishing this book because I was absolutely loving it when I was reading it. I just physically couldn't read it anymore. So I have 4 books left, and these were very kindly sent to me by Book Depository after I did my anticipated releases for October through December 2020 video, which I'll link up above and I'll link down below. So the first one is The Tea Dragon Society, which I read in the month of November, so you can go ahead and check out my wrap-up. It's super cute, there's no plot, it's an adorable graphic novel, it's tiny, I loved it, it was fabulous. So that one I would highly recommend picking up. Again, you can see more in my wrap-up. I also got a copy of These Violent Delights, which I do feature in that video of anticipated releases. This is basically a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, but set in the 1920s in Shanghai, and there are monsters. So Roma and Juliet are part of rival gangs in Shanghai, and they have to kind of come together to stop this horrible entity that is killing people in their city. It sounds so good. I've heard fabulous things about it. I'm really hoping to read it this month because I think it's going to be really good. The next book that I received from Book Depository is Scapegracers by Hannah Abigail Clark. This is one I've heard not a huge amount about, but I think is one that I'm really gonna enjoy and will hopefully break the curse of not enjoying witchy books that I talk about in my November wrap-up. This sounds really fun. It is a contemporary YA book, but it has a supernatural twist, and just judging from the blurb, it sounds like something that I would enjoy, having really enjoyed the craft, so we'll see. But basically we follow a character named Sideways Pike, who is a sort of outcast in her school. She's not only a lesbian, she is also a witch, but she ends up kind of finding a group of friends and forming a coven with 3 really popular girls at school after they sort of pay her $40 to cast a spell at their Halloween party. So they end up kind of getting swept up in sort of magic and also girl stuff. So the 4 of them form this bond, and Sideways has a difficult time with this whole having friends thing. It says, "Who knew that balancing human interaction with supernatural peril could be so complicated?" This sounds amazing. It sounds like it's going to be a book about female friendships and female relationships, which of course you guys know I absolutely love, and I absolutely adore the kind of like angry teenage witch kind of subgenre, I guess. So I think that this is going to be one I really enjoy. And the very last book that I have to talk to you guys about is Central Station by Lavi Teder. I think that this is another one where I look at the blurb and my eyes kind of glaze over, but it looks like a really interesting sci-fi novel, and it's one that I've not really heard anyone talking about, and I'm super curious about it. I've had this on my radar for a fair few years, and I finally broke down and bought a copy. But as far as I can tell, this book is about Central Station, which is a space station that has this kind of huge growing population, and the city's kind of left unchecked. Life is cheap and cultures are colliding and crashing. And so in this we have, you know, space colonies where humanity has gone to escape the ravages of poverty and war. We have powerful alien entities. We have data streams and data vampires. We got all this kinds of crazy stuff, and I'm really curious about this one. If you've read this, let me know, because I again just haven't really heard anyone talking about this, but it is a tad older than some of the stuff that gets talked about on YouTube in terms of like recent releases. I think it came out in 2016. So that is it for my November book haul. Like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of really good stuff in here, and though I've read a couple of things, I am really looking forward to diving into more of these books in December and in January, and trying to get a little bit ahead of my arcs and my proofs and copies on my TBR for next year. I would love to hear in the comments below if you have read any of these books, if they're in your TBR, if any of them sound interesting and brand new to you, and also if you hauled anything really good in the month of November. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.